Do hearing aids make me hear normal again? Today I want to talk about one of the biggest questions when it comes to hearing care, even though many people don't always quite ask it in those exact words. Many times it sits underneath the whole conversation and process. Welcome to Earman Dan. If you're new here, my name is Daniel and a very warm welcome. I'm a hearing care professional and the owner of Ear Studio in Castle Hill in Sydney. But more importantly, I spend my days helping people, not just to hear better, but actually to understand better and leave behind the challenges of hearing loss. And in this channel, I break down how hearing really works, how the hearing care landscape looks in Australia, and what you can do to get the best possible outcome. Now, I invite you to follow along in this journey. So, someone may come into my office and they've had their hearing test, and they're starting to understand that hearing aids may be part of the solution for them. And that obviously starts a whole process and a storm of kind of investigation and thoughts. And during that process of consideration, somewhere in the back of the mind, the question normally comes out is, if I do all of that and if I go through this and get hearing aids, will my hearing be normal again? And I think people really deserve a straight answer. And that answer is no. Hearing aids do not make your hearing normal again. But now before you go and switch that video off and say, thanks, Dan, that's encouraging, stay with me. Because not normal, it doesn't necessarily mean not helpful or not worth it or not life-changing. In most cases, devices are all three. They are helpful, they are worth it, and they can certainly be life-changing. But it's not normal hearing, and we need to talk about that quite honestly. Now, one of the biggest problems in hearing care is that people are sold hope in the wrong package, really. I blame that partially on the hearing device manufacturers' marketing and partly on the hearing care professionals delivering care at times. We all have to play a role in this, really. In marketing, clients are given the impression that these tiny devices are going to put them back where they were 20 years ago, and they can hear everything clearly in every situation, even in severe background noise. And that's not the case. And that's why I often tell people that they shouldn't even start reading the marketing brochures of the hearing aid manufacturers, because that's all kind of fairy tales, really. When they go through the process and then they encounter challenges, they may feel disappointed or like hearing aids don't work for them. But in many cases, it's not the issue that the hearing aids didn't work. The issue is that the expectation was unrealistic from the start, and we actually see that quite frequently. So let's look at why that is. A hearing aid in simple terms is an amplifier and a sound processor. A lot more complex than that, but essentially it makes sound more audible and it changes the sound the ears are getting so that they compensate what the ears have naturally lost. What hearing aids do not do is reverse the underlying biological damage in the ear. If the sensory cells in the inner ear are damaged, and in most common adult hearing losses that is exactly the issue, a hearing aid can't regrow those cells. So let's very briefly talk about what a healthy inner ear does, because in very simple terms, it basically detects sounds and sends them to the brain. And when the inner ear gets damaged, it often gets damaged in two ways. One way affects the volume of sound, that you don't hear it as loud anymore, and the other one affects the accuracy of sound. It's a little bit like a golf swing. In a golf swing, there's power, and that's the distance. And then you've got the accuracy, and that's the direction of the golf swing. In the inner ear, both of those functions decline. You hear less, and you hear a little bit distorted. Now, it's relatively easy for us to restore the volume aspect. We just make sounds louder, and we can fix that relatively easily. But the accuracy aspect is much more difficult, because the ear is still damaged, and the sound of the hearing aid actually needs to go through the damaged ear. And the device cannot give you back a natural and healthy inner ear. It works with what is left of the ear, and in many cases, it does that very well, but it's still working with a damaged ear after all. Hearing and eyesight is often compared by patients, but I quite often say that ears and eyesight are very different in the way that people imagine it. With glasses, you can often just put the right lens in front of the eye, and the image sharpens quite dramatically. That is because the lens of the eye was damaged, and it can be corrected by an external lens to nearly 100%. But that is only in the relation to an issue in the lens. If one has macular degeneration, that is much closer to hearing loss, where the actual sensory cells are damaged. If the macula is damaged, glasses can help correct the lens-related issues, but there will still be blurry spots, and that's the same with hearing. That's why many people say to us, I can hear that people are talking, but I can't understand what they are saying, and that is often the accuracy aspect of it and a little bit of missing clarity. The problem is not the volume alone, it is essentially clarity and detail. So when someone puts a hearing aid in for the very first time, and they expect everything to sound perfectly crisp and natural immediately, like getting new glasses, that's just often not how it goes. What usually happens is much more gradual than that, and that is often on purpose. We don't really want to fix everything in the first instance. In the first instance, a person normally notices that they hear more sound, and often that's a lot more sound. There are things such as, what we commonly hear is footsteps on the ground and cutlery, crockery, indicators in the car when they're driving home, rustling paper, and most of all, birds. Even people hear their own clothes rustling and those type of things, and their own voice, and that one can really throw people off. Often it's the first comment actually when I switch devices on is oh, my voice sounds strange. It sounds like I'm talking through a megaphone type thing. And I say, yeah, that can very much be part of the beginning. Not because the hearing aid is wrong, but because your brain is suddenly getting access to things that it hasn't heard properly for quite a while. And humans are funny that way. Normal to us is what we are used to. The brain forgot the real normal. And if we give you something closer to the real normal, then the brain struggles with that in the beginning because it's not its current normal. Now, what I'm not saying, though, is that every strange sound experience should just be tolerated and waited out. Hearing aids definitely need adjustment, and that process will take a fair while. I personally, in our clinic, we take 6 to 8 weeks with the clients over 4 or 5 appointments to ensure that those initial settings are really good, and in that time, we often see phenomenal improvements. Then we let it sit there and we let the brain do some acclimatization work and even some auditory retraining. And over the course of another year, we continue to see improvements because a lot of that is actually brain work and not ear work. So when it comes to hearing devices, don't expect that you have the maximum benefit of the devices right away on day one. The point remains that there's almost always, an adjustment process that you need to go through. And that is where hearing care gets reduced far too often to just the device itself. People compare brands and levels and features and all those type of aspects. And all of that has its place, but the device alone is not the whole product, not even remotely close. The outcome depends on how the devices are selected, how they are programmed, and what support the patients are getting after the first fitting, and whether or not the time has had enough time to adapt to those new sounds. Now, I've seen people return hearing aids 4 days after the initial fitting when they were giving up because, they are not suitable. Where in reality, the client has been living with severe or significant hearing loss for 15 years, got totally used to that level of hearing, and 4 days of wearing hearing devices are simply not anywhere near enough to judge the quality of the devices. In a matter of fact, that is that the first few days are actually quite an upset to the system. And research in the hearing rehabilitation space has shown that the best time frame or that the best point to evaluate the hearing device's success is around 6 weeks after the fitting. And that is assuming that the devices were worn around 80 to 90% of the client's waking hours. So 4 to 6 weeks, better 6 weeks. And then we can really measure and assess how well are the hearing aids doing. But in that time, there should have been certain adjustments and supportive processes to help the brain get used to it. So you can buy a very good hearing aid, the technology of it, but still get a poor result if the whole process around the hearing rehabilitation was poorly executed. And on the other hand, when the process is done really well and properly, the result can be excellent, even though I will still not call that normal hearing. That is why it pays to give that process all the time and effort it deserves. Keep in mind, and I say that very, very frequently, that hearing affects literally every second of the time that you spend awake. So let's look at what people should realistically expect, and that's what I generally tell people, that they should expect improved access to sound, and that conversations become a lot easier in many situations. You should expect less listening effort and less fatigue if the devices are correctly programmed and if you're using them properly. You should expect that soft sounds that you have been missing for quite a while, that they come back. In quiet, many people do very, very well, but you should also expect that difficult environments may still be difficult. A crowded restaurant is still a crowded restaurant. And a family lunch with 12 people talking over each other is still not exactly an easy acoustic situation, and you will struggle somewhat in those environments. Now, hearing aids can improve that situation and sometimes quite a lot, but they don't turn chaos into silence and like crystal clear speech. But once again, do not expect that to happen on the first day or even in the first few weeks. Give it some time and proper follow-up processes. Follow the instructions that the hearing care professional is giving you because they are there for a reason. And this is also where I circle back to something that I've said in other videos. Hearing and understanding are not the same thing. The ears detect sound and the brain interprets them. Hearing aids only fix the one part, the access to sound. But successful hearing care is much more than devices. It is about rehabilitation and adaptation, because it takes a while, as I said a few times, to get used to it. That is why one person may put a hearing aid on and fairly quickly say, wow, that's great, while another person with a similar hearing loss kind of doesn't like them. The difference is not the hardware. They may be using exactly the same device, but it means that they may be at different points in time. It is the process, it is the counseling and the fitting and the expectations the client had, and if the user had hearing aids previously or not. Also, how long have they waited to get the hearing treated? If you're treating your hearing loss early, you normally get a better result sooner than someone who leaves it for a fairly long time. Another thing worth mentioning is that sometimes hearing aid help tremendously, but they are still not enough for a particular ear or a particular type of hearing loss, and in those situations, other options may need to be discussed. That doesn't mean the hearing aids failed, it just means that the hearing loss requires a different level of solution. Again, the important thing is an honest assessment first and not expecting something that the ears just can't deliver anymore, even with the best hearing care. Now, let's talk quickly about the emotional side, because I do think that that's actually important. When people hear not normal, they kind of can feel defeated. But in clinic, that's not what I see in reality. What I see is relief when communication becomes easier. I see like husbands and wives stopping that constant back and forth of what and never mind. And I see people rejoining and re-enjoying conversations. I see people that are less exhausted at the end of the day because the brain didn't have to compensate so much. And none of that really requires normal hearing. What it does require is a meaningful and a significant improvement, the best improvement that we can get. And that is very much what you can realistically expect if you go to a clinic that follows best practice principles. Not every hearing loss can be successfully treated with a hearing aid alone. If the ear is too far damaged, we may need to consider other options such as accessories or even cochlear implants. But look, that's a whole different conversation. Just wanted to mention that. So look, if you come and ask me, will my hearing aids make me hear normal again? My answer is still no. But if you ask, can properly fitted hearing aids make a real life-changing difference? Then in many cases, the answer is absolutely yes. Those two are very different questions. And I think one of the best things a clinician can do is make that distinction for the patient early, clearly, and without any nonsense. Because once you understand what hearing aids actually are there to do, you usually cope much better with the journey. You stop judging the hearing aids by like a fantasy standard or expectation, and you start judging them by what really matters. Am I hearing more? Am I understanding better? And am I struggling less? That is the standard that I care about. So no, hearing aids are not magic. They do not restore normal hearing. But when they are done well, they can make a very real difference to the quality of your life. And in many cases, that truly is life-changing. And to me, that's what really matters. Now, as usual, if you've got any questions, drop them in the comments or get in touch via email and I'll try to answer them in another video. Until then, I wish you all the best and bye-bye.